Commander Zethkar sat in the small metal room, his blue skin showing dark bruises from the battle that had ended just hours ago. His forearms hung loosely at his sides as he stared at the smooth walls of what the humans called a detention bay. The Voran warrior stood nearly 8 feet tall, his natural armor plating covering most of his body like a living shield. He had expected to die in battle, not to wake up as a prisoner on an alien ship. The door opened with a soft hiss, and a human walked in. Zethkar had seen humans during the fight, but this was his first chance to study one up close. The creature was small and soft-looking, with pink skin that seemed fragile as paper. It had only 2 arms and no natural armor at all. How had beings like this managed to defeat his battle fleet? The human wore a dark blue uniform with strange markings on the chest. His hair was brown and cut short, and his eyes were a color Zethkar had never seen before, like the sky of his homeworld. The human carried a small medical kit and a container of what looked like water. "I am Captain Jake Morrison," the human said in perfect Voran language. Zethkar was surprised that this alien could speak his tongue so well. The captain set the medical kit on the small table and gestured toward Zethkar's wounded arm. "May I treat your injuries?" Zethkar growled low in his throat. He would not show weakness to an enemy, even one who offered help. "I need nothing from you, human. Your kind will pay for this defeat when my empire learns what happened here." Captain Morrison nodded slowly and sat down across from the alien warrior. He opened the water container and took a small sip, then placed it where Zethkar could reach it. "The empire you speak of, how many worlds does it control?" The question seemed harmless enough. 17 star systems bow to Voran might," Zethkar said with pride. "We have conquered them all in glorious battle. Our warriors are the finest in the galaxy." He paused and looked at the small human with curiosity. "How many worlds do humans control?" Morrison was quiet for a moment, as if thinking about the answer. "We have colonies on 43 worlds, but we do not rule them. They joined us by choice. Most of them asked for our protection after learning about our military history." Zethkar laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the metal walls. "Protection from humans. You are small and weak, with no natural weapons or armor. What could you possibly protect anyone from?" The human captain studied Zethkar with those strange colored eyes. "We have been fighting wars for over 10,000 years, long before we reached the stars. We learned how to make war against our own kind. 10,000 years of fighting themselves." Zethkar found this hard to believe. The Voran Empire had existed for only 300 years, and in that time, they had conquered every enemy they met. How could a species waste so much time fighting among themselves instead of expanding across the galaxy? Morrison seemed to read his thoughts. "You think we are weak because we fought each other instead of conquering others. But those wars taught us things that your empire has never had to learn. They taught us how to win when victory seems impossible. They taught us how to keep fighting when any sane being would surrender." The alien warrior shifted in his chair, suddenly feeling less comfortable. There was something in the human's voice that made his warrior instincts stir with unease. What kind of things? Morrison leaned back in his chair, and his expression grew distant, as if he was remembering something from long ago. "My grandfather told me stories about the old wars, stories about battles that lasted for months over a single city, stories about soldiers who kept fighting even when they were starving and freezing." Zethkar had heard enough of this nonsense. No warrior fights when defeated. When the battle is lost, honor demands surrender or death. There is no shame in falling to a superior force. The human captain was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked directly at Zethkar with those unsettling eyes. "Would you like to hear about a place called Stalingrad? It was a city on our homeworld where 2 human armies fought each other for 200 days. When it was over, More than 1 million humans were dead. But the strange thing was, neither army ever really surrendered. 1 million dead over one city. Zethkar tried to imagine such waste of life. The largest battle in Voron history had claimed perhaps 10,000 warriors. What could be worth such a terrible cost? Morrison stood up and walked to the small window that showed the stars outside. The city itself was not important. It was just buildings and streets like any other place. But both sides decided they would rather die than let the enemy have it. So they fought in the rubble and the snow until the city became a graveyard. The alien warrior felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. He had been taught that humans were weak and cowardly, fit only for slavery or quick death. But this story suggested something else entirely. A species that would fight to the death over worthless ruins was not weak. It was something far more dangerous. Morrison returned to his chair and picked up the water container. He took another sip and then offered it again to Zethkar. This time, the alien warrior accepted it. The water was cool and clean, better than anything he had tasted in days. "Tell me more about this Stalingrad," Zethkar said quietly. Captain Morrison settled back in his chair and began to speak in the same calm voice he had used before. Stalingrad was not just one battle, he said. It was hundreds of smaller battles fought building by building, room by room, sometimes over a single staircase or basement. Zethkar listened as the human described how two massive armies had crashed into each other in the ruins of a city. The Voran warrior tried to understand why anyone would fight in such a place. When his people attacked a city, they simply bombarded it from space until nothing remained. Fighting in ruins made no sense. Morrison seemed to know what he was thinking. "You wonder why we did not just destroy the city from above. Both sides had the weapons to level the entire place in hours. But that would not have won the war. Each army needed to hold the ground, to plant their flag in the center and say, 'This place is ours.'" The captain began telling stories about individual humans who had fought in that terrible place. He spoke of Sergeant Danny Walsh, a sniper who lived in the broken remains of a factory for 30 days. Danny ate scraps of food he found in the rubble and drank water from melted snow. Every day he picked off enemy soldiers one by one, never letting them know where he was hiding. Zethkar had been a sniper himself in his younger days, but he had always worked from prepared positions with proper food and supplies. The idea of living like an animal in ruins while still fighting effectively seemed impossible. How did this Danny Walsh stay alive for so long? Morrison smiled grimly. Danny learned to think like the rubble itself. He moved through holes in walls that most humans could barely fit through. He slept in different places every night. When enemy soldiers came looking for him, they found only empty rooms and shadows. The captain continued with the story of Lieutenant Susan Carter, who commanded a squad of 12 soldiers in holding a single apartment building. They had orders to keep the enemy from crossing the street, no matter what happened. For 37 days, they fought off attacks that came at all hours. Susan and her soldiers turned every room into a fortress. They broke holes in the walls so they could move between floors without using the stairs. They rigged the building with explosives so they could bring down entire sections if the enemy got too close. When their ammunition ran low, they made bombs. From whatever they could find, Zethkar tried to imagine fighting for over a month in one building. The longest battle he had ever been in lasted 3 days, and that was considered a major engagement. How did these humans keep their minds from breaking under such pressure? "The winter was the worst part," Morrison said. The temperature dropped, so low that metal would crack from the cold. Water froze solid in minutes. Most alien species would have died from exposure in hours, but the humans kept fighting. The captain described how soldiers would huddle together for warmth in basements that had no heat. They burned furniture and books to make small fires that barely kept them alive. When food ran out, they ate leather from their boots and wallpaper paste scraped from walls. Medics like Dr. Kate Phillips operated on wounded soldiers by candlelight in those frozen basements. She had no proper tools and barely any medicine, but she kept trying to save lives even when there was almost no hope. Kate worked for days without sleep, moving from patient to patient in the darkness. Zethkar felt his stomach turn at the image of wounded warriors being treated in such conditions. Voran military doctrine called for immediate evacuation of the wounded to proper medical facilities. The idea of performing surgery by candlelight seemed like torture, not healing. Morrison was not finished with his stories. He told of soldiers who fought for weeks without seeing sunlight, moving through tunnels and sewers beneath the city. They learned to navigate by sound and touch, knowing that any light would draw enemy fire. The humans developed new ways of fighting that had never been used before. They would wait until enemy soldiers entered a building, then collapse the floors beneath them. They dug tunnels under enemy positions and filled them with explosives. They learned to fight in 3 dimensions, attacking from above and below, as well as straight ahead. Both armies lost thousands of soldiers every day, Morrison continued, but neither side would retreat. The commanders kept sending in more troops, knowing that most of them would die before the week was over. Zethkar interrupted the story with a question that had been bothering him. Why did they not just abandon the city? If so many were dying, for so little gain, why continue the fight? Morrison was quiet for a moment before answering. Because both sides understood that Stalingrad had become more than just a city. It had become a symbol. Whoever won there would prove they were stronger than their enemy. Whoever lost would be seen as weak by the rest of the world. The human captain explained how the battle had changed the course of their entire war. One army had been winning every fight before Stalingrad, conquering everything in their path. But when they got stuck in that city, their advance stopped. Other enemies saw this and realized the mighty army could be beaten. By the time winter ended, Morrison said, the city was unrecognizable. Every building had been damaged or destroyed. The streets were filled with rubble and bodies. But the humans who held the city had proved something important about their species. What did they prove? Zethkar asked, though he was beginning to understand the answer. Morrison looked directly at the alien warrior with those unsettling eyes. They proved that humans will fight for ground that has no strategic value, will die for symbols that exist only in their minds, and will keep fighting long after. Any reasonable being would give up. They proved that we do not calculate war the same way other species do. Zethkar sat in silence, processing what he had heard. The battle Morrison described was not about tactics or technology. It was about something deeper and more disturbing. It was about a species that treated war itself as a test of will, not just a method of conquest. The Voran warrior began to understand that he had seriously underestimated these humans. Their small size and soft appearance hid something far more dangerous than natural armor or multiple arms. They had minds that could endure suffering and keep fighting when their bodies should have collapsed. Morrison stood up and checked the time on a device attached to his wrist. I will return tomorrow to continue our conversation. There are many more stories to tell. As the human captain left the room, Zethkar found himself staring at the stars outside his window. For the first time since his capture, he was not thinking about escape or revenge. He was thinking about a frozen city on a distant world where 1 million humans had died rather than surrender a single street. When Captain Morrison returned the next day, Zethkar was waiting for him. The alien warrior had spent the night thinking about Stalingrad and the humans who had died there. He found himself wanting to hear more, even though each story made him more uncomfortable than the last. Morrison brought fresh water and some food that looked safe for Voran biology to consume. He sat down across from Zethkar and studied the alien's face. You look troubled, my friend. Did the stories from yesterday disturb your sleep? Zethkar accepted the food gratefully. I have been thinking about your Stalingrad. In all the wars my people have fought, We have never encountered an enemy willing to die for worthless ground. It makes no sense from a military perspective. The human captain nodded slowly. That is because your people fight wars to win territory or resources. Humans learned long ago to fight wars for ideas, for symbols, for principles that cannot be touched or measured. Morrison began telling new stories, these ones even older than Stalingrad. He spoke of battles fought in muddy fields where millions of humans had died over strips of land barely wider than this detention cell. Places with names like Somme and Verdun, where armies had faced each other across empty ground for years. Lieutenant Colonel Peter Hughes knew that machine guns were waiting for his men when he ordered them to attack, Morrison said. He knew that thousands would die in the first few minutes. But the battle plan required someone to charge across that field, so he gave the order anyway. Zethkar tried to imagine giving such an order. Voran military doctrine emphasized preserving your forces while destroying the enemy. Ordering troops into certain death violated every principle he had been taught. Why would any commander waste soldiers like that? Morrison explained how humans had developed tactics specifically designed around mass casualties. They learned to advance through clouds of poison gas that burned their lungs and blinded their eyes. They created artillery bombardments that could be heard from hundreds of miles away, turning entire regions into moonscapes of mud and metal. The captain told of Captain Lisa Rodriguez, who flew bombing missions over enemy cities knowing that innocent civilians would die below. She would return to base after dropping tons of explosives on homes and schools, then fly the same mission again the next day. How did she live with herself? Zethkar asked. Voran warriors fought other warriors, not helpless civilians. The idea of deliberately targeting non-combatants seemed like madness. Morrison's expression grew dark. Lisa believed that killing civilians quickly would end the war faster than fighting only soldiers. She thought that if the enemy's cities burned, their government would surrender to save what remained of their people. The human captain described weapons that existed only to cause suffering, gas that ate through skin and lungs, leaving victims to die slowly in agony. Bullets designed to tumble through flesh, creating wounds that could not be healed. Bombs filled with tiny metal fragments that would blind and cripple rather than kill quickly. Zethkar felt sick as he listened to these descriptions. The Voran Empire used clean weapons that killed swiftly and honorably. Why would anyone create tools designed specifically to increase pain and suffering? Morrison continued with the story of Major Chris Bennett, who had been ordered to hold a AE position against overwhelming enemy forces. Chris knew his men would all die, but he also knew their sacrifice would buy time for other units to escape. He gathered his soldiers and explained the situation honestly. What did they do? Zethkar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. They stayed, Morrison said simply. Every single one of them chose to die rather than abandon their duty. Chris led them in a final charge that lasted less than 10 minutes. None of them survived, but they delayed the enemy long enough for 20,000 other soldiers to reach safety. The alien warrior sat in stunned silence. He could not imagine Voran troops willingly dying for strangers they had never met. Such sacrifice went against every instinct of self-preservation that evolution had built into intelligent beings. Morrison began explaining how humans had turned warfare into a science of death. They developed mathematical formulas to calculate acceptable losses for each objective. Commanders would look at maps and decide that taking a hill was worth exactly 300 lives, or that destroying a bridge justified losing 50 aircraft. General Ryan Murphy could look at a battlefield and tell you precisely how many soldiers would die in each phase of the attack, the captain said. He planned battles like other beings planned construction projects, budgeting lives the way engineers budget materials. Zethkar realized with growing horror that humans did not just accept casualties in war. They calculated them, planned for them, spent lives like currency to purchase victory. The Voran Empire, for all their military pride, had never developed such cold mathematics of death. Morrison told stories of soldiers who fought for years in trenches that stretched across entire continents. Men like Sergeant Bobby Clark, who lived underground for months at a time, emerging only to attack enemy positions a few hundred yards away. The ground between the armies became so poisoned with gas and covered with bodies that nothing could grow there for decades. These trench wars created a new type of human, Morrison explained. Soldiers who could sleep while artillery shells exploded overhead. Men who could eat their breakfast while sitting next to the corpses of their friends. Warriors who measured progress in yards gained rather than enemies defeated. The captain described how these battles changed the humans who survived them. They returned home with minds that had been broken by what they had seen and done. Many could never adjust to peaceful life again, having learned to find comfort only in the controlled chaos of warfare. Zethkar asked the question that had been troubling him most. If war damaged your people so badly, why did you continue fighting? Why not find other ways to solve your disputes? Morrison was quiet for a long moment before answering. Because we learned that some ideas are worth more than the lives of those who hold them. We discovered that freedom, justice, and honor cannot be preserved without sacrifice. And we found that sometimes the only way to stop a greater evil is to become something terrible ourselves. The human captain stood up and walked to the window again. The worst part is that we became very good at it. By the time we reached the stars, humans had perfected warfare in ways that other species cannot imagine. We know how to break armies, how to destroy civilizations, and how to win wars that should be impossible to win. Zethkar felt a chill of fear, unlike anything he had experienced in battle. He was beginning to understand that the human sitting across from him represented something far more dangerous than superior technology or tactics. Morrison was part of a species that had spent 10,000 years learning how to make war into an art form. Tomorrow, I will tell you about our greatest war, Morrison said as he prepared to leave. The one that ended with weapons that could destroy entire worlds in seconds. As the door closed behind the human captain, Zethkar found himself trembling slightly. He had always believed that the Voran Empire was the most fearsome military force in the galaxy. But these stories suggested that humans had been practicing warfare since before his species had even discovered fire. Captain Morrison entered the detention cell carrying a small device that projected images into the air. Zethkar had not slept well again, his mind filled with visions of humans charging through poison gas and dying in frozen trenches. The alien warrior was beginning to dread these daily conversations, yet he found himself eager to hear more. Today, I want to tell you about the war that changed everything for humans, Morrison said as he activated the device. Images began appearing in the space between them, showing maps of a world covered in conflict. This was our Second World War, and it made all previous battles look small by comparison. The projected images showed armies that stretched across entire continents. Zethkar watched in amazement as Morrison explained how millions of humans had fought simultaneously on land, sea, and in the air. The scale was beyond anything the Voran Empire had ever attempted. Admiral John Parker commanded fleets of over 1,000 ships, Morrison said, pointing to images of massive naval battles. These fleets fought each other across oceans, turning entire seas into graveyards. John learned to coordinate attacks involving hundreds of aircraft and dozens of warships moving in perfect formation. Zethkar studied the tactical displays with professional interest. The coordination required for such operations was impressive, but he still did not understand why humans would commit such resources to fighting each other instead of expanding into space. Morrison seemed to read his thoughts again. By this time, humans had learned that some conflicts cannot be avoided or negotiated away. One side in this war had decided that certain types of humans did not deserve to exist. They built factories designed specifically for killing millions of people as efficiently as possible. The captain showed images that made Zethkar's stomach turn. Vast complexes with smokestacks and railway lines where humans had industrialized murder on a scale that defied comprehension. Millions of their own species had been processed through these death factories with mechanical precision. General Mary Thompson commanded armies that destroyed their own cities rather than let the enemy capture them. Morrison continued. She ordered the systematic demolition of bridges, roads, factories, and farms across hundreds of miles. Mary turned her own homeland into a wasteland to deny resources to invaders. The alien warrior tried to imagine destroying his own world to prevent conquest. Such an action went against every instinct of survival and preservation that guided Voran. Thinking, why would any leader choose destruction over defeat? Morrison explained how this war had taught humans to fight on a global scale. He told of the siege of Leningrad, where civilians had been trapped in a city for nearly 3 years. People ate grass, paper, and leather to survive. When that ran out, some ate the bodies of the dead. Parents watched their children starve to death in their arms, Morrison said quietly. But they still refused to surrender the city. Over 1 million civilians died rather than give up. Zethkar felt his worldview cracking as he listened to these accounts. The Voran Empire had rules about civilian casualties and treatment of non-combatants. The idea of letting children starve for military objectives seemed like the behavior of monsters, not intelligent beings. The captain continued with stories of battles that raged across frozen wastelands and burning deserts. He spoke of Lieutenant Carl Hayes, who fought through cities that had been reduced to rubble by months of artillery bombardment. Carl and his men learned to navigate by the smell of corpses and the sound of distant gunfire. Morrison described how humans had learned to wage war in the air as well as on the ground. Pilots like Major Sandra King flew missions deep into enemy territory, knowing that most of them would not return. Sandra completed 47 bombing runs before her luck ran out. The captain showed images of cities that had been flattened by aerial bombardment. Entire districts reduced to smoking ruins where hundreds of thousands of civilians had lived. The scale of destruction was comparable to what Voran warships could accomplish from orbit. But the worst was yet to come, Morrison said, as the projected images changed to show a different type of weapon. Near the end of the war, human scientists created something that changed warfare forever. The new images showed a blinding flash of light followed by a massive mushroom-shaped cloud rising into the sky. Zethkar watched in fascination as Morrison explained how humans had learned to split atoms and release the energy that held matter together. 2 cities were destroyed in seconds, the captain said. Over 200,000 people died instantly when the atomic fire consumed everything within miles of the blast. Those who survived the initial explosion died slowly from radiation poisoning in the days and weeks that followed. Zethkar stared at the images in disbelief. The weapon Morrison described was more powerful than anything in the Voran arsenal. A single bomb that could level an entire city was beyond current alien technology. How had humans developed such devastating weapons so quickly? Morrison's expression grew grim as he continued the explanation. The strangest part is that we called the people who used those weapons heroes. The alternative was an invasion that would have killed millions more on both sides. Vaporizing 2 cities was considered the merciful option. The alien warrior felt his understanding of warfare shift fundamentally. The Voran Empire fought for territory, resources, and honor. But humans had developed weapons that made traditional concepts of victory meaningless. What was the point of conquering a world if you could accidentally destroy it in the process? After the atomic weapons ended the war, Morrison said, human military thinking changed completely. We realized we had created tools that could destroy our entire species if used carelessly. So we started building thousands of them. Thousands, Zethkar repeated in shock. Why would anyone build so many world-ending weapons? Morrison deactivated the projection device and looked directly at the alien warrior. Because we learned that the threat of total destruction was sometimes the only thing that prevented smaller wars from starting. When everyone knew that a conflict could end with the destruction of civilization, people became much more careful about starting fights. The captain explained how humans had spent decades in a state called Cold War, where massive armies faced each other without fighting while building ever more powerful weapons. Scientists developed bombs that could destroy entire continents, missiles that could cross the world in minutes, and submarines that could end civilization from beneath the oceans. Zethkar tried to process what he was hearing. The humans had created a military doctrine based on the threat of mutual annihilation. Both sides had pointed weapons of ultimate destruction at each other for generations, maintaining peace through the promise of apocalypse. The atomic weapons were just the beginning, Morrison continued. Humans learned to make bombs using hydrogen, fusion that were thousands of times more powerful than the ones that destroyed those first cities. We built rockets that could deliver these weapons to any target on our planet within an hour. The captain described how human military technology had advanced at an incredible pace once they understood atomic energy. They developed guidance systems that could hit targets from thousands of miles away, detection networks that could spot incoming attacks from space, and defensive systems designed to shoot down enemy missiles. By the time we reached the stars, Morrison said, human warships carried weapons that could sterilize entire worlds from orbit. We learned to fight battles across multiple star systems simultaneously, coordinating attacks that spanned light years of distance. Zethkar sat in stunned silence as the implications sank in. The human sitting across from him represented a species that had progressed from throwing rocks to building planet-killing weapons in just a few thousand years. The Voran Empire had taken centuries to develop interstellar flight, while humans had weaponized atomic energy within decades of discovering it. Morrison stood up and prepared to leave as he had done each day before. Tomorrow I will tell you about our more recent conflicts. Wars where we learned to fight enemies who looked like civilians, who used our own mercy against us, and who turned children into weapons. As the human captain left the room, Zethkar found himself staring at his own hands. The natural armor plating that had made him feel invincible now seemed pathetically inadequate. What good were claws and strength against beings who could split atoms and burn worlds? When Morrison returned for their fifth conversation, Zethkar noticed that the human captain looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usual calm demeanor seemed strained. The alien warrior wondered if telling these stories was as difficult for Morrison as hearing them was for him. The captain sat down heavily in his chair and was quiet for several minutes before speaking. Today I want to tell you about the wars that broke our minds, he said finally. Conflicts, where we learned that traditional rules of combat no longer applied. Morrison began describing battles fought in jungles and cities where enemy soldiers looked exactly like innocent civilians. He told of Lieutenant Kevin Stone, who spent 3 tours of duty in a place called Vietnam, fighting an enemy that emerged from tunnels and melted back into the population. Kevin never knew if the farmer working in a rice field was really a farmer, or a soldier waiting to attack, Morrison explained. He never knew if the child walking down the road was carrying school books or explosives. Every decision had to be made in seconds, and the wrong choice could kill his entire squad. Zethkar tried to understand this type of warfare. Voran military doctrine was based on clear identification of enemies and civilians. How could any army function when they could not tell who was trying to kill them? Morrison continued with the story of Sergeant Amy Mitchell, who had been trained to show mercy to non-combatants, but found herself in situations where mercy could be fatal. Amy learned to make split-second decisions about whether a running figure was an innocent person fleeing danger or a suicide bomber about to kill dozens of soldiers. The captain described how these conflicts had changed the humans who fought them. Soldiers returned home with minds that could not distinguish between war zones and peaceful neighborhoods. They would wake up screaming from dreams where children threw grenades and grandmothers fired machine guns. Lieutenant Karen Price served 4 deployments in urban warfare, Morrison said. By the time she came home, Karen could not walk through a crowded market without scanning every person for hidden weapons. She could not see a piece of trash on the road without wondering if it was a bomb. The alien warrior listened with growing unease as Morrison explained how modern human conflicts had created new types of psychological damage. Warriors who survived these wars often could not readjust to civilian life, having learned to see potential threats everywhere they looked. Morrison told of Colonel James Carter, who had been shot down behind enemy lines and captured by forces that did not follow traditional rules for treating prisoners. James was tortured for information he did not have, held in conditions that broke other humans completely, yet somehow maintained his sanity for 5 years. What kept him alive? Zethkar asked, genuinely curious about how any being could endure such treatment. James learned to retreat into his own mind, Morrison replied. He built mental fortresses where his captors could not reach him. He held conversations with people who existed only in his memory. He planned escape attempts that he knew were impossible, just to keep his mind focused on something other than the pain. The captain described how James had finally been released as part of a prisoner exchange, returning home to discover that his ordeal had changed him fundamentally. He could no longer trust easily or form close relationships, having learned that anyone might be an enemy in disguise. Morrison continued with stories of asymmetric warfare, where technologically advanced, human armies fought against enemies who used primitive weapons but employed tactics that exploited human psychological weaknesses. These enemies understood that humans tried to minimize civilian casualties and used this compassion against them. Suicide bombers would hide among crowds of innocent people, Morrison explained. Enemy fighters would use schools and hospitals as military bases, knowing that humans would hesitate to attack such targets. They turned our mercy into a weapon against us. The captain told of incidents where human soldiers had been forced to choose between completing their mission and protecting civilians. Captain Nick Taylor had been ordered to destroy a bridge that enemy forces were using to transport weapons, but discovered that refugees were also using the same bridge to escape the fighting. What did he do? Zethkar asked, though he suspected the answer would disturb him. Nick destroyed the bridge, Morrison said quietly. He saved hundreds of soldiers by cutting off enemy supply lines, but he also killed dozens of civilians who happened to be crossing at the wrong time. Nick completed his mission successfully and was promoted for his tactical brilliance. The alien warrior felt sick as he contemplated the impossible choices these human commanders had been forced to make. Voran military culture emphasized clear objectives and honorable combat. The idea of weighing soldier lives against civilian lives in split-second decisions seemed like torture disguised as leadership. Morrison described how human military training had evolved to prepare soldiers for these psychological challenges. They learned to compartmentalize their emotions, to make decisions based on logic rather than compassion, to function effectively while carrying guilt that would crush most other species. Modern human warriors are not just physically tough, the captain explained. They are mentally conditioned to handle moral complexity that would paralyze other beings. We train them to kill when necessary, show mercy when possible, and live with the consequences of both choices. The captain told stories of soldiers who fought multiple deployments in different conflict zones, adapting to new enemies and new rules with each assignment. They learned to switch between urban combat, jungle warfare, desert operations, and peacekeeping missions without losing their effectiveness. Sergeant Linda Cooper served in 7 different theaters of war during her career, Morrison said. She fought street to street in destroyed cities, tracked enemies through dense forests, protected convoys crossing hostile deserts, and kept peace between warring factions who hated each other more than they feared death. Zethkar marveled at the adaptability Morrison described. Voran warriors specialized in specific types of combat and rarely operated outside their area of expertise. The idea of constantly adapting to new environments and enemies while maintaining peak effectiveness seemed impossible. Morrison's expression grew darker as he continued. The worst part is what these wars did to entire generations of humans. We created soldiers who were perfect killing machines but could not function in peaceful society. Men and women who could handle any combat situation but could not sleep through a quiet night at home. The captain described veteran communities where former soldiers gathered because they could only relate to others who had shared similar experiences. These humans had been changed so fundamentally by warfare that they could no longer connect with civilians who had never faced life-and-death decisions. Some of them miss the war, Morrison said with obvious pain in his voice. They function better in combat zones than in their own homes. The chaos and danger of battle feels more natural to them than the safety and comfort of peace. Zethkar realized that he was seeing genuine emotion from the human captain for the first time in their conversations. Morrison was not just recounting historical events, he was sharing personal knowledge of these damaged warriors. As Morrison prepared to leave, he paused at the door and looked back at the alien prisoner. Tomorrow I will tell you something that you need to understand about humans and war. I will explain why we are telling you these stories and what we want from your empire. After the captain left, Zethkar found himself pacing his small cell like a caged animal. Each day brought new revelations about human capacity for violence and endurance, but today had been different. Today he had seen that warfare damaged humans just as much as their enemies, yet they continued to fight anyway. On the sixth day, Captain Morrison entered the detention cell carrying a datapad instead of his usual projection device. Zethkar had spent another sleepless night thinking about everything he had learned, and he could see from the humans' expression that their conversations were about to take a different direction. Morrison sat down and placed the datapad on the table between them. Before I tell you why we have been having these conversations, I need to share something personal with you, he said. I was not just assigned to guard you during your capture, Zethkar. I was the tactical officer who planned the operation that defeated your fleet. The alien warrior stared at the human in shock. This gentle, soft-spoken captain who told stories about ancient battles had been the mind behind his defeat. Zethkar tried to reconcile the calm storyteller with the tactical genius who had outmaneuvered his entire battle group. Morrison activated the datapad and showed tactical displays from the recent battle. Your fleet attacked our convoy using standard Voran doctrine, he explained. Overwhelming force applied to multiple targets simultaneously. It was an excellent plan that should have worked against any traditional enemy. Zethkar watched the replay of his own defeat with professional interest. He could see how his ships had moved according to established patterns, following tactics that had brought victory against 16 other species. But the human response had been unlike anything in Voran military experience. We did not fight you, the way other species fight, Morrison continued. We used strategies developed over 10,000 years of human warfare. Tactics learned in trenches and cities, techniques perfected in conflicts you cannot imagine. The captain showed how human ships had appeared to retreat while actually drawing Voran forces into a carefully prepared trap. The apparent disorder of the human formation had been a deliberate deception designed to exploit Voran assumptions about proper military organization. Your commanders expected us to fight for territory and tactical advantage, Morrison explained. Instead, we gave you what appeared to be easy victories while positioning ourselves for a single decisive strike. We traded space for time, accepted losses to gain position, and won the battle by losing most of the individual engagements. Zethkar studied the tactical display with growing understanding. The humans had fought the entire battle according to principles that violated Voran military doctrine. They had deliberately accepted casualties that any rational commander would have avoided, all to achieve a strategic objective that was invisible until the final moment. Morrison continued his explanation by showing how human military thinking had evolved beyond traditional concepts of warfare. Our current doctrine is based on 10,000 years of conflict experience, he said. We have fought every type of enemy in every possible environment using every conceivable weapon. The captain began describing humanity's current position in the galaxy. We have alliances with 43 colony worlds and 17 different alien species. Most of them came to us asking for protection after learning about our military history. Zethkar interrupted with a question that had been bothering him. If humans are so dangerous, why do other species ally with you instead of trying to destroy you first? Morrison smiled for the first time in their conversations. Because we learned something important from all those wars, he said. We discovered that the best victory is the one you do not have to fight for. Most conflicts can be avoided if potential enemies understand exactly what they would face in battle. The captain activated new files on the datapad showing human military installations throughout the galaxy. Admiral Helen Davis commands joint human-alien fleets that patrol 17 star systems, he explained. General Robert King trains alien warriors in human tactical doctrine. We share our knowledge freely with anyone who asks for it. Morrison described how humans had used their reputation for military excellence to create peace rather than wage war. Species that might have fought each other instead came to human mediators for help resolving disputes. Potential aggressors reconsidered their plans when they learned what human intervention might involve. The captain told of recent conflicts where human forces had ended wars by demonstrating overwhelming capability, rather than using it. A single human battleship appearing in orbit was often enough to stop planetary conflicts that had raged for decades. We have learned to project power without using it, Morrison explained. The galaxy knows what humans are capable of in war, so most disputes are settled peacefully when we offer to mediate. Zethkar began to understand why he had been captured alive and treated well. The stories Morrison had told were not random entertainment. They were a calculated demonstration of human military capabilities. Every tale of human endurance and tactical innovation had been chosen to deliver a specific message. Morrison seemed to read his thoughts again. You asked me yesterday why we were telling you these stories, he said. The answer is simple. Your empire controls 17 star systems through superior technology and traditional tactics. But you have never fought a species that considers warfare itself to be an art form. The captain leaned forward and spoke directly to the alien warrior. We do not want to fight the Voran Empire, Zethkar. We have enough enemies already, and we respect your people's military traditions. But if your empire forces us to make war, you need to understand what that would mean. Morrison activated a final file that showed human battle fleets positioned throughout the galaxy. We have been preparing for this conversation since we first detected Voran expansion, he said. If diplomacy fails, we are ready to demonstrate why other species whisper about humans in fearful tones. The alien warrior felt a chill as he studied the fleet positions. Human ships were stationed near every major Voran system, positioned for simultaneous strikes that could cripple his empire's military capability within hours. The humans had been planning this confrontation for months, while the Voran High Command remained oblivious. Morrison stood up and walked to the window one final time. In 2 hours, a Voran diplomatic vessel will arrive to negotiate your release, he said. You will be returned to your empire unharmed and with complete recordings of our conversations. Zethkar realized that everything had been planned from the beginning. His capture, these daily conversations, even his eventual release were all part of a larger human strategy. Morrison had not been interrogating him, he had been educating him. The captain turned back from the window and looked directly at the alien warrior. When you address your high command, you will have a choice to make. You can recommend war against humanity and watch your empire learn firsthand what 10,000 years of conflict experience means in practice. Or you can recommend peace and help both our species avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Morrison picked up his datapad and prepared to leave for the final time. Remember what you have learned here, Zethkar. Remember that humans fight wars not just to win territory or resources, but to prove points and defend principles. Remember that we will endure any suffering and inflict any necessary damage to achieve victory. As the human captain reached the door, he paused and spoke without turning around. Most importantly, remember that the choice between war and peace now belongs to your empire. We have shown you what we are capable of. What happens next depends on how wisely your leaders use this knowledge. 2 hours later, Zethkar stood in the docking bay of a Voran diplomatic vessel, still carrying the recordings Morrison had given him. As his transport departed the human ship, he found himself staring back at the vessel that had become his classroom in the realities of human warfare. During the journey home, Zethkar spent hours reviewing the tactical data and conversation recordings. Each time he watched Morrison describe human military capabilities, he felt the same chill of recognition. The humans had not been boasting or threatening. They had been stating facts with the calm confidence of professionals. When his ship finally docked at the Voran home world, Zethkar knew exactly what he would tell the High Command. He would recommend immediate peace negotiations with humanity, and he would explain in detail why war against these beings would be suicide for his empire. 3 days later, Commander Zethkar stood before the assembled war leaders of his people. His voice steady as he delivered his report. "Make peace with the humans," he told them. "Give them whatever they want, accept whatever terms they offer, but do not force them to demonstrate their military capabilities in battle." The High Command listened in silence as Zethkar described what he had learned about human warfare. When he finished, the chamber remained quiet for several minutes before the senior general spoke. "Are you certain about these assessments, Commander? Are humans truly as dangerous as your report suggests?" Zethkar thought about Morrison's calm voice describing millions of dead in frozen cities, about tactical doctrines based on acceptable casualties, about weapons that could destroy entire worlds. He remembered the human captain's quiet confidence when discussing military capabilities that defied imagination. "Honored General," Zethkar said finally, "I am certain that everything I have told you represents only a small fraction of what humans are capable of in war. I recommend that we never discover what else they might do if forced to fight us." The Voran Empire formally requested peace negotiations with humanity the following day.